Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another God of War video. Today, with us still rounding out the important core characters of Ragnarok, I thought that we could touch on a pivotal character in the twilight end of the gods, a descendant of the first giant Ymir, and lover of the giantess Sinmara. We have none other than the very last fire giant, Surtr. Now, to really talk about Surtr, as he is a primordial, we will have to touch on his origins. Where does he come from? How exactly did he come into being? And how this all does evolve in the God of War universe, as the Surtr we see here is much different from the Surtr we know in Norse mythology. So sit back and kick up your feet as we do a deep dive on the bringer of Ragnarok. But as always everyone, before we do begin, I would of course super appreciate it if we could get this video to about 1,000 likes. It's a small thing, but it really does go a long way with supporting the channel here, especially as we're doing a lot of new stuff going forward. So without any further ado, let's get on to talking about the history of Surtr. Now, to understand just how such a powerful being came into creation, we must first go to the dawn of time, where there was the very first giant, Ymir, and the first two realms, Niflheim and Musphelheim. Now, in between these two realms existed a plane known as Gnupggup. It does essentially function as a middle ground between the two realms, and is where Ymir lived, and where Odin and his brothers were born. So this plane of reality is of great importance in the God of War universe. Now, due to Ymir's tremendous size, he spilled over into both the freezing cold winds of Niflheim, as well as the scalding heats of Musphelheim. Due to the incredible heat, Ymir would begin to sweat, and whilst on the surface it seemed like nothing, the puddle that formed from this would take shape into that of Surtr, making him one of the very first beings to have come into creation. So Surtr is extremely old, but he wasn't the only one that came into being, with his somewhat counterpart being a giantess by the name of Sinmara. Now, originally, when Sinmara and Surtr encountered each other, they were at each other's throats, despising what the other represented, as they were so vastly different from each other. But during their feud, the two would be attacked by unknown beasts, and after partnering together and vanquishing these mysterious assailants, Sinmara and Surtr fell in love with each other, finding a form of deep respect and affection for each other. But this love wasn't to last, as it did fall apart when the Nine Realms formed, and they learnt of the Ragnarok prophecy, the end days of the Nine Realms, and it would be at both their hands no less, as the prophecy foretold that the two were destined to combine together, lose their identity, and become a giant being that would eviscerate Asgard, renewing the Yggdrasil life cycle and destroy Odin. Not wishing to commit to fate, both Surtr and Sinmara returned back to their respective realms, knowing that they could never be together as it would spell their end. But as an eternal symbol of each other's love, Sinmara and Surtr did exchange each other's hearts, symbolizing that even if they were apart, they were never not by each other's side. Now Surtr, left alone and isolated to the depths of Musphelheim, hoped to forge a blade that could in fact defy fate, therefore changing the prophecy and altering both his and Sinmara's fate, as it looks like no matter how many swords he forged, the outcome was always the same, and the prophecy did seem inevitable. Now, during Surtr's self-imposed incarceration, he would actually be approached by a fellow giant, Hrumfir. Now, knowing of his fate, the giants would go on to inform him about the flaw that he had built into Asgard's walls, knowing that one day, Surtr would have to shatter the realm. But even with this information in tow, Surtr simply brushes off this information, still unwilling to comply with the fates. So Surtr, prior to the events of the 2018 game, remains largely absent in the Nordic saga, only making his first official appearance during the end half of God of War Ragnarok. After the tragic death of Brock, we are introduced to the fire giant, and he is in fact far more different than what any of the legends had foretold. He's a husk of the great primordial that all knew him to be. So once he's disturbed by the likes of Kratos and Atreus, knowing what they were here for, he simply casts his hand and forces the two of them away, having them fight his Draugr and Soul Eaters in the hopes to fend them off. But of course, this does not stop them. So once he is approached by the two again, he makes his intentions very clear, that he is not interested in participating in their war. Whilst alone, Surtr knows what becomes of his beloved if he chooses to accept their offer. So, unable to willingly sacrifice someone he loves, he tells the two to leave them. But as Kratos turns his back, the fire giant is surprised once he gazes upon the blades of chaos, sensing a familiar spark in them, one that resembles the primordial flame. Surtr believes that there might be a different way to fulfill the prophecy, one that saves his Sinmara, seeing as Kratos' very presence defies the Ragnarok prophecy. The fire giant believes that the blades are in fact the key to turn him into Ragnarok, the physical manifestation of the apocalypse. But the only way this could be achieved would be by having Sinmara's heart stabbed into his chest, therefore completing the prophecy, but in a way defying what was originally intended. Surtr finally gives in to fate, allowing Kratos to plunge the blade deep into his heart. So once Surtr falls into the ether, his mind is very quickly lost, and he becomes Ragnarok. Now fully succumbed to this monstrous persona, Surtr lacks any rational thought, being an incomplete version of what was originally foretold. Surtr's now one and only reason to exist is to destroy Asgard, acting as an agent of the eternal cycle. The giant waits in the abyss for the Gjallarhorn to sound, and upon being done, Ragnarok would literally tear his way into Asgard, piercing through the very base of the realm in his new, ginormous form, one that towers Asgard and eclipses the entire battlefield. Now blinded by his devotion to the prophecy, Ragnarok pushes through all to fulfill his quest, seeing them all as his enemy. And he does fill this request with the defeat and death of the Allfather. Finally reaching the heart of Asgard, Surtr takes his ginormous blade and casts it deep into the root of the realm, basking in fire and brimstone as it is completely annihilated. So both Surtr and Asgard do perish, bringing an end to the final step in the Ragnarok cycle. Now, a little fun fact is that things weren't originally intended to turn out this way in the developmental side of things. From what we know with the data mined files of the game, we've come to learn that originally Sinmara had a much bigger role, and in fact, Surtr's sacrifice here was supposed to be in vain, and Atreus, now fueled by vengeance, fools Sinmara into believing that Odin killed Surtr. So grief-stricken, Sinmara would undergo a similar transformation out of revenge for her love, not knowing that this was all built on a lie. Something that Kratos openly expresses disappointment with as he expected better from Atreus. But of course, this is all cut out in the final product. But still, an interesting thing I did want to point out here. Now, whilst quite left field, I actually really love how they portrayed Surtr here. There's a form of beauty in the tragedy that befalls him, and it's all done out of love. So Surtr is forced to make the tough call and willingly give his life so that she can survive. It's a very different and out of their interpretation, but honestly, I think it's a welcomed one, as it adds a lot to his sacrifice. What did you think of Surtr, guys? Did you like his inclusion? Or would you like to have seen that cut Sinmara content actually be played out? Please do comments down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say. But for now, everyone, that has been it for me. So as always, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting, as Ragnarok is finally over. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon.